Oh yeah, I live for the carnival, and I know that it will be magical.
Carnival. What comes to mind? For the Americans, my audience, you might be thinking of the amusement parks of your youth. But when I'm talking about Carnival, I mean Trinidad Carnival. Juve Monday morning to Carnival Tuesday, and everything else that's involved. I mean Canboulay and Panorama, the fetes and the limes, the lights and the sounds, the paint and the mud, the costumes, the drinks and the jam. That's real Carnival. And from its roots, Carnival has been distinctly tied to class and class struggle, especially struggle against the state in Trinidad. The word Carnival comes from the Latin carnis, meaning flesh, and vale, meaning farewell. Carnival was a time of final celebrations and feasting before the rigorous piety of Lent and Easter. There are carnivals all over the world, thanks to colonization, but Trini Carnival is one of the best known. In Trinidad, during slavery, only white people were allowed to play. Not even free coloreds could be involved except to mask up. Enslaved African people were totally barred from the activities. From Christmas till Ash Wednesday, the colonizers took part in masquerade balls, house parties, street parades, dancing, and whatnot. Oh, and they dress up as black people and play up stereotypes. Since slaves couldn't participate, they'd create their own celebration, Canboulay, from the French can brûler, or burnt cane. When fires broke out in the plantation, the enslaved were rounded up by the plantation owners and forced into the danger area to collect all the cane surrounding the fire to prevent its loss. They reclaimed it as a celebration, where drums, singing, dancing, and chanting were performed. The art of calypso was born there, one of the earlier forms of cultural resistance on the island. It developed from the uniquely West African style of kaiso, blended with the then common French Creole. Slaves used calypso to mock their masters and communicate with each other. Canboulay laid the foundation for the unique carnival we know today, bringing together traditional West African masking, sacred rituals, festive merrymaking, and scathing calypso. After emancipation in 1838, things switched up. Ex-slaves took over Carnival, transforming it into their celebration and ending its domination by the respectable. And so it began, a tug of war, a dialectical play, a game of accommodation and conflict centered around Carnival between the European ruling class and the African working class. A few years in, the colonial government realized the threat to their status quo that Carnival represented. So they took quite a few efforts to regain control. In 1846, they outlawed masking. In 1849, they reduced it from the usual Sunday to Tuesday festivities to just Monday, called Juve, and Tuesday, called Mardi Gras. Of course, that didn't do much to suppress it. As one clearly pressed writer in the Port of Spain Gazette put it, "Since midnight on Sunday, the slumber of peaceable citizens has been disturbed by the usual noisy revelry and uproarious hilarity by bands of music, including those inelegant instruments, the banjee and shak-shak." Child racism jump out, yes? But the ruled continued to resist. By 1847, what we now see as traditional carnival had mostly taken shape. You had your stick fighting and stick dancing, which were made from poetries and sometimes used to fight off the police. You had your bands with traditional masks like bat, jam jab, and moko jumbi. You had Canboulay, fully integrated in the festivities, because before then, it was celebrated in August to commemorate emancipation. There were a few minor riots in the 1850s, but true concerns about the serious suppression of Carnival arose in the 1860s. Canboulay and its attendees were vilified by contemporary media and British colonial government, who referred to the celebration as jamet, indicating that Canboulay was celebrated by the lowest in society, the underclass carnival of the dock and warehouse workers, laundrywomen, prostitutes, gamblers, cornermen, and others from the impoverished, exploited, and overcrowded East Port of Spain communities. Communities which are still disenfranchised today, by the way. It was there that the bands would develop, duking it out through drumming and stick fighting, and led by a usually female soloist called Chantel, whose role was to boast of their band's musical accomplishments and roast rival gangs, all in the style of calypso. They employed a verbal dexterity seen in other distinctly African music styles, like rap.
No, I'm free as a bird. Liberty is the word. West Indian, Caribbean, African, Nubian queen.
White folks also lived in Port of Spain at the time, and closeness to such a bold and proud culture made white authorities extremely uncomfortable and unsettled. The San Fernando Gazette would describe them as youthful in years but matured in every vice that perverts and degrades humanity, wanton, perverse, and depraved beyond expression. R.G. Hamilton, a colonial office representative from London, called Canboulay a senseless, irrational amusement that affords a pretext for the indulgence of unbridled licentiousness on the part of the worst of the population. People still enjoyed it though. There was an almost vicarious satisfaction in the flair, wit, and devil-may-care attitude displayed by the Calypsonians. In the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, the working-class Calypsonians would assault their rulers in song. In Old Mass and Juve morning, costumed revelers would mock the governor, the chief justice, the attorney general, well-known lawyers, and other higher-ups. Carnival was also quite raunchy. Pioneered by the so-called jamettes, the puistics were phallic, the street dancing was spicy, and cross-dressing in transparent nightgowns was particularly common. Of course, its originators saw the activities as harmless fun, but it only demonstrated the difference in views of sex and gender between the masses and the upper class. Then this guy, Captain Arthur Baker, Inspector Commandant and Chief of Police in Trinidad for the British Empire, decided he'd had enough with all this carnival madness. In 1878, 1879, and 1880, he ramped up arrests and controlled the streets with an iron fist. Those carnivals were quite orderly, but things changed in 1881. In a drunken bet with a friend of his on Sunday night, February 27, 1881, Captain Baker agreed he would end the festival once and for all. He organized 150 police officers in Carnival Monday and moved them to the Market Street in Port of Spain. The people were out in their numbers that night, drunk, resolute, and unintimidated. For the next 3 hours, armed with broken rum bottles, pui sticks, and stones, the revelers clashed with the police all across Port of Spain, and even Princess Town and San Fernando. After a Brit from the police force was hit in the head with a stone, police opened fire, killing one and wounding 2 others. The crowd dispersed in fear for their lives, and in the end, there were many injuries on both sides. Expecting more trouble, Captain Baker told the then governor of Trinidad, Sanford Freeling, that he should send more troops to Port of Spain. He agreed but decided he'd address the people first. He told them the government just wanted to prevent fires, not stop Carnival, which isn't exactly true, but okay, white lie. But he did promise he'd withdraw the police and army if the people didn't cause any trouble. Other than the effigy of Captain Baker the revelers burned, and the mock funeral they held in front of the police barracks, things were pretty chill. The Colonial Office asked R.G. Hamilton to inquire of the events. This is the same R.G. Hamilton that called the whole thing a licentious affair, so naturally he sided with the brave Captain Baker and formally rebuked Governor Freeling before the Colonial Office. With all that went on, preparations for Carnival 1882 were elaborate. Doctors, magistrates, and troops were all on full alert, and an evacuation plan was prepared for the governor. None of that was necessary though. The bands avoided confrontations with the police and each other, and the festivities were unusually peaceful. In Carnival 1883, there were suspicions that agents provocateurs were paid to disrupt carnival bands and start fights so that Carnival could be outlawed completely. In Carnival 1884, the Legislative Council rushed to outlaw disorderly assemblies of 10 or more people, as well as banning drumming and other unauthorized dancing and processions. Carnival continued that year, and Port of Spain was quite peaceful, but riots broke out in San Fernando and Princess Town. Later called the Jose Riots, or more accurately, the Muharram Massacre, the colonial authorities introduced legislation to restrict Jose, a Shiite Muslim festival that involved both East Indians and Afro-Trinidadians. There was a lot of labor unrest at the time, and the authorities feared that the sharing of such festivities might lead to further working-class unity between black and brown people in Trinidad, and potentially, revolution. The then sugarfield workers rejected the restrictions and marched ahead in San Fernando. In response, the police fired on the crowds, killing at least 20 people and wounding over 100. The Port of Spain Gazette approved, saying that, "In dealing with an ignorant and semi-savage peasantry, the supremacy of the law should be upheld at all times, and regardless of consequences." Message received. Jose was never the same again. In the 1880s and 90s, the authorities moved to suppress Carnival's lewdest elements through anti-obscenity laws. With the suppression of these jamet elements, a new, now male-dominated ultra-macho calypso arose. There were other riots and revolts in this time. In one case, a riot broke out after constables attempted to confiscate the now banned African drums from a Shango ritual in 1891. To get around such culturally oppressive laws, the resourceful people of Trinidad created the tambor bamboo, a precursor to the modern steel pan. Things were changing for the working class festival of flesh. After all the suppression and revolt, things were beginning to change. The black and coloured middle class began to see Carnival as a bedrock of reform away from the Crown colony government, economic reorganisation away from the plantation system, and greater electoral representation. They wanted to use Carnival for political aims. Of course, they weren't really the basis of Carnival. Although the middle class was part of the working class, they turned up their noses to the sexually suggestive and threatening masquerade. So they had to find an in. They offered financial and other support for the working class, but in exchange, they meddled and regulated the content of masquerades and the behaviour of revellers. They established calypso tents and best costume band competitions, eliminated the violence and lewdness, and diluted the offensive, rebellious character of the whole affair. Soon, Carnival was a middle-class thing, a year-long preoccupation with costumes and band organisation. And for what? An alcohol-soaked extravaganza that the middle-class nationalists used to contrast the dominant British culture of the elites. Carnival became a means of social control and acceptance. Pretty soon, protests shifted from the festivities to other channels. The Trinidad Working Men's Association was founded in 1897, and in 1901, Henry Sylvester Williams formed the Trinidad Pan-African Association. Stay tuned for my video on Pan-Africanism, dropping next week. These days, Carnival still retains many of its previous elements. You have Juve and band competitions and panorama, and even reenactments of the Canboulay Riots. It's played with a lot of issues though, like the colorism, racism and fat phobia that's so prevalent in the 1% owned carnival bands today. Soca burnouts try to tackle people's body image issues, and political calypso is all but dead. People are priced out of expensive fetes and take out loans for $3,000 costumes. And of course, crime ramps up because people are trying to get money for Carnival. Personally, I think Carnival is a form of opium these days. 2 years ago, I read 1984 by George Orwell. Stay with me on this, I know it's basically a cliche these days to mention 1984. One of the things that really stuck with me in that book was the 2 minutes hate. It was a moment where the oppressed masses, under the totalitarian thumb of the state, could release their bottled emotions toward an imaginary enemy. An outpouring of rage, supposedly for the enemy, that revealed the deep pain felt by the people. Obviously, Carnival isn't a festival of hate, but in the drunken chaos, it really seems like a means of social control. A pre-approved period of release within certain limits, like the purge, a fete of lust, envy, gluttony, and wrath. People say they can't wait for Carnival as they're stuck in the grinding mill of capitalism, a brief reprieve and a subsequent catharsis for an otherwise miserable daily reality, a rat race of struggle. Donald Wood, author of Trinidad in Transition, summed it up so beautifully. The souls of the most miserable can only be seen either thrown into dramatic relief by events when their frustration explodes, or in the shadowy but persistent forms of oppositional culture, particularly Carnival. Carnival, in Trinidad as elsewhere, symbolically turned the world upside down. On Juve morning, poor, powerless and degraded people, black and ugly, felt gorgeous in their carnival costumes. Taking to the road in shining rainbow crowds, they felt part of a potentially powerful mass. But in a few short hours, it would be Ash Wednesday, when even the old talk has a ragged edge, dull and frayed. There were no sequins in the clouds. After all, Shantytown is no sultan's tent. I say we bring back the carnival spirit. I say we bring back the struggle for freedom, dignity, creativity, and self-realization. The tradition of resistance. Let we carry the torch. Peace. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in more Caribbean history, I partnered with Tristan at Step Back History to produce a video on the Maroons. Link in the description. Thanks once again to the family, Ongrad, Kobe Tamayo, John Veshi, Orishimoni, and Swavocado Jones. You can join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/SayingTrue. Or you can give a one-time donation on kofi.com/SayingTrue. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with your fellow revelers. Feed the algorithm. Check out my previous videos for other fascinating topics. You can follow me on Twitter @_SayingTrue. Thanks again. Peace.